Holly-Ann Martin was awarded the Order of Australia Medal this year in the Queen's Birthday Honour List, being recognised for her contribution to child safety. Holly-Ann Martin is the founder Managing Director of Safe4Kids. For 35 years, she has developed resources and delivered programs that are preventative measures to combat child sexual abuse through her company Safe4Kids. Since 2010, around 4,500 children, 1,000 teachers and educators, and 1,000 parents each year have received her training. She has empowered children throughout the world and equipped parents and educators with the tools to help prevent child abuse, whether this abuse is through physical harm, cyberbullying, or inappropriate content available on the internet. She has provided training in 84 remote Aboriginal communities around Australia and 40 childcare centres. Thank you for being here with us, Holly-Ann. Can you please tell us about what the definition of child protection is?
Well, the program that I teach is a child abuse prevention program, and it's designed to help adults empower children, because unfortunately across the world, 1/3 of children will suffer some form of sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. But that's the whole spectrum. So that could be a child being exposed to at a bus stop, kids seeing pornography, right to the most heinous acts. But no matter what the act is, it changes the child from that day. So the program that I've developed is to help adults talk with children as young as 3 about simple things about, nobody's allowed to touch your private parts and things like that. And then, I talk to 6-year-olds about pornography, and because there's so much of it on YouTube and things like that. Yes. So it's about empowering adults to empower children. Mm-hmm. Protective behaviours was developed in the US back in the late 70s and came to Australia in the late 80s in the place of stranger danger, because only about 10% of child sexual abuse is by a stranger. That's right. Both contact and online. 90% is by somebody that's known to the child. So without frightening kids, we can empower them and give them language and show them strategies that, heaven forbid, should something happen to them, they'll know how to, seek help and things like that. Fantastic. And how did you get involved in this? Can you give us a little bit of a history behind your company? Yeah. So ironically, back in 86, 87, I worked as a nanny when the America's Cup was here in Western Australia. And I was a nanny for a French family who were tied up with the Louis Vuitton Cup, which is the prelude to the America's Cup. Right. And after that, I started working as a teacher assistant at a special school. So we always knew our kids with special needs were up to 7 times more likely to be abused than mainstream children. And then a few years later, I was introduced to a program called Protective Behaviours, and had been teaching it for 25 years. And then back in 2007, we have something called long service leave here in WA after you work for 15 years. It's reduced now, but back in the day it was 15 years. You get 3 months paid leave. And I went up into some Aboriginal communities here in my state where some terrible things were happening. So in my leave, I went up there and volunteered and ran the program, and then just saw a huge need for resources. So I quit my job, took a $250,000 loan out on my home to produce the resources. Wow. I have written 5 children's books and have been doing it full time ever since, right across Australia. I've got to travel to the US. I've spoken about 5 conferences over in the US about our program. But also I've taught it in Mexico, Qatar, Indonesia, Cambodia, and the UK. Wow. So all over the world, really. And can you tell us a little bit, I was very intrigued about the work that you do with the Aboriginal communities. How does that, is that different to what you would do outside of their communities? To start with, I have to be invited into the communities. They're very And because of the subject matter, of course, it's very,
Yes.
they're a very patriarchal society.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a taboo subject. So to be invited in is a huge honour. And I'll only go in if I've been invited. But once I'm there, it has to be a whole of community approach. So I train the teachers in our program to continue once I've left, work with the children. I'm usually there for a week in each community. But then I train police, health, childcare, all of the NGOs, and then run a women's workshop and a men's workshop. And I've been really lucky here in Australia to have run over 80 workshops with solely Aboriginal men talking about this subject, which is unheard of because, they don't, men and women don't normally talk about this, well, sex or any subject like this. It's quite separate. And lots of people say, you can't talk to the men about that. But the men love it. And they say, Holly, we like you because you tell us straight way. And they're our kids too. And we need to know this.
Yes.
But I don't go in naming, blaming and shaming. I simply say, this is what I'm teaching your children. Thought you'd like to know about it. And because it's done with respect and, not in a shaking your finger sort of way, they want to be good dads. It's just nobody's thought to take the time to actually talk to them about this. And one of the things that I always end my talk with is how to receive a disclosure from children. Because, if a child comes to you and says, oh, the boy next door touched me down there, and a parent goes, oh, they'll stop the child. So I explained to the men, you need to say, I'm glad you told me. I believe you. It's not your fault. And I'm going to do something about it. Those words need to come out of any adult's, mouth. But the men just sat there going, oh my gosh, we hadn't realised, because normally Aboriginal men would say, oh, if anybody hurt my kid, I'd kill them and all this sort of stuff. And of course, kids love their parents. And so because of the grooming process, they might be told, we'll hurt your family and things like that. So we need to give adults the words to be able to say to children, but also teach children, no one's allowed to touch your private parts. It's imperative children know the correct anatomical names for their private parts, because you won't get a disclosure without it. And they've done studies with perpetrators who say if a child's, calling it a fairy or a cookie or whatever, they're more likely to go after a child like that. But culturally, Aboriginal kids, would never use those words. But when I explain why it's important, and also I explain that if you're talking sex education with kids, you have to separate boys and girls. But because it's done with a whole of community approach, the community say, no, the children need to be in the room together because the boys need to know about what the girls have heard and vice versa. So it's tricky, but it's always been just so well received.
Well, that's great, because I'm sure eventually the Aboriginal children will, leave their own communities at some point, won't they? And they'll go into other communities where maybe these things are a little bit more prone to happen.
Well, and because mobile coverage is, in all the communities, even very, very remote communities, children are accessing porn, and every child's on TikTok. So, it's so complex. But yes, they do go for sports weekends and they go to major towns and things like that. And back in the day, even before they all had mobile coverage, if they went to a major city, like Alice Springs, for instance, quite a large town in the Central Desert, teenagers would download pornography on USB sticks and smuggle it back into the communities in their underpants, and then break into the shop, not steal anything, but watch the pornography on the shop's computer.
Right.
So there's so many complexities.
Yes. So you touched on something that I wanted to bring up. So if a child discloses something to an adult, you've said the 4 things that the adult should say. How else should an adult respond to a disclosure? What if a child says, I don't want you to tell anybody else? And obviously you can't not tell anybody else because something needs to be done about it. So how do you navigate all of that?
Well, first of all, they have to stay calm. And when is saying stay calm to anybody ever works? That's why in my training, I give those 4 sentences. Just, you need to know those by rote. So if you've got those 4 sentences, hopefully that can help you stay calm. Yes. But they mustn't ask any leading questions. If you ask who, what, when, where, you'll taint the evidence for police. So here in Australia, what I teach is that if a child comes to a parent or anybody, nanny, and says, I've got to tell you something, but you've got to promise not to tell, I can't promise to keep that. But with our program, one of the things we've taught children is to listen to their body, and we call them their early warning signs. It's the physical reaction we get when we feel unsafe. And I teach the children the thumb up for safe and the thumb down for unsafe. So every time I say it, automatically now I just... But we teach children that if you get your early warning signs, you have to tell somebody on your safety team, and we help the children set up a safety team of 5 adults. So with children, I explain that if an adult gets their early warning signs, they have to tell somebody on their safety team. So in my program, I actually walk children through how to make a disclosure, basically. And I say, if a child came to me and said, Holly, I've got an unsafe secret, I've got my early warning signs. If I'm in a school, who would I have to talk to? And they go, oh, the principal. And then if the principal had their early warning signs, who would they have to tell? Oh, the police. So I've already laid the foundation. So there's no surprises, but we cannot promise to keep the secret, because keeping a secret, well, we just can't, because, well, here in Australia, we've got mandatory reporting. I'm sure it's the same around the world. But also, and people say, what if a child says they've got a secret, but if you'll tell somebody, they're not going to tell you. If a child comes to me and says, I've got an unsafe secret, I'm making the phone call anyway, even if they don't tell me the secret, because it's not my job. If I'm a child and I've suffered sexual abuse and I tell you, then it's your job to fix it. You've got to stop it from happening. But every time I tell my story, I'm reliving it. So we don't want children to tell everything. And so by saying I've got my early warning signs, we're actually stopping the child telling the whole disclosure, because we want the whole disclosure on camera in front of police to get the best outcome for a child. So, but here in Australia, the legislation says you need to form a belief that something has happened. But you know what children are like? Sometimes they faff about and they'll just tell you a little bit and to see if you catch on to that. So if somebody couldn't put their hand on a Bible and swear, that child definitely said that. If there's still something that you're not quite sure of, the only question I recommend people ask is, so tell me more about that. Because that is an open-ended question. Right. You can't get in trouble. You can't taint the evidence. But, if you say, oh, did you touch it down there, or who was it, or whatever, you can't do that. But tell me more about that. And then the second you've got enough to know that something's happened, you don't want the child to tell you everything. Because if I tell you everything, and then by the time I get in front of the camera, I might have told you, and then I had to tell this person, and then I had to... We're not going to get the whole story. So it's really tricky. But, if people follow these guidelines, it will make it so much easier. And I actually, I'll send you, I've got a poster with all this written down. If you want to put it in the show notes for people, it's a free print off. Great. But yeah, I'm happy to share that with your listeners to see if they, want to print it off, just so it's,
fresh in their mind.
Yeah.
Because I think when you work with children, at some point, the children you look after or the children you're close to are going to share things with you, and you need to know how to respond. And obviously the first thing one does is, oh my God, how do I respond? What do I do? Who do I tell? And all these things are happening while you're trying to listen to what the child is telling you. So it's good to have those sentences to kind of
Yeah.
ground you a bit.
And to be honest, the nannies are more likely to be the people that children disclose to, because those dear little people that they tuck into bed every night think they have to parent their parents.
Mm.
So children don't normally, in my experience, disclose to a parent. They're more likely to a nanny, to a friend's parent, or their school teacher, because they're that one step removed from
Yes.
the person that loves them the most. And then perpetrators might be saying, I'll hurt your family and things like that. So kids want to protect people. Yes. So, the nannies that hopefully will be listening to this are in a very special position where, they're loved by the children, but they're more likely to disclose to them. So it's sort of like a double-edged sword, really.
Yep. And how can nannies or parents, grandparents, anybody who's around children help teach children how to feel safe?
To be modeling it, to be honest, children, next week I go out to 3 remote communities in the next 2 weeks, very remote communities. And they want me also to talk about domestic violence. So I've been doing some looking into that, and I found a really good video that talks about, children are little sponges and they mirror everything that they see. So, that's why we make funny faces with babies, so that and then they mirror it back, sort of thing. So, people need to model talking about their feelings. We need to give kids a feelings vocab. For me, one of the most important feelings words for children is the word frustrated. So if nannies and parents are seeing children, having a meltdown, model that back. So, it looks to me like you're feeling frustrated, and, to help them calm down. Like I said before, just teaching them the thumb up for safe and the thumb down for unsafe. So if they're out in a park and something's happening, they can just simply do it really subtly to the nanny, or, and they're, okay, come in closer to me, and things like that. Or if they're on the other side of the park, and rather than yelling, get out of that tree and save your voice, and just go like that really dramatically.
Yes.
Modeling, especially when I'm teaching teachers, I'm saying to them, I need you to be modeling feelings vocab all of the time. I do a lot of work for childcare centres here in Australia, and educators say, Holly, you're like a breath of fresh air, because when we did our training, we were told we can't be negative with the children. So they say, eat your lunch or I'll be sad. Put the blocks away or I'll be sad. Do you know what? I'm not going to be sad. I'm going to be annoyed.
Yeah.
So parents and nannies, and especially dads, can be, using their feelings words to express themselves, then children are going to, pick up on that. Why is it a 2-year-old can say the F word in context?
Mm-hmm.
Because they hear the F word in context.
Yes.
And yet when I'm asking children, and even, 12-year-olds, to name me feelings, happy, sad, angry, and scared, there's only 4, because they're not hearing those words. So, it's not confronting it, but if people could just be, I'm so proud of the way you did that. I'm really annoyed. I'm furious. Kids will, model that. And then, like I said, they mirror everything. So if we can be, talking, and it's important that adults talk about bad things as well, because we don't live in everything isn't rainbows and unicorns, but not to frighten the children. But I mean, one of the key messages that I want parents to teach children. So our program is based on 2 things. We all have the right to feel safe all of the time, and we can talk to someone about anything. And parents and nannies need to reinforce that with children. Nothing you'll ever tell me will stop me loving you. You can tell me anything. Mm-hmm. And so, if we have to do that too, not in a frightening way, but, I'm really annoyed because this has happened, and this is how we're going to deal with it. So we're not going to just put it all on the children, right? Because I know children nowadays, and especially after COVID, I've just read a report yesterday actually about teenagers and anxiety and things like that. And, even very young children are suffering with anxiety. But if parents can be, we all have these situations, but we can deal with it together and have those clear messages. I heard this really, really gorgeous strategy, which I absolutely love. It's called the no trouble bubble. Mm-hmm. And basically you set up with children that if a child comes home and says, I was suspended at school today, and the parent goes mad at the child, they're never going to come back and say, hey, I'm pregnant, I've got a girl pregnant, I'm on drugs or whatever. So even from a very young age, if a child calls a no trouble bubble, basically what happens is they get told that they're loved, they get an 8-second hug, it's not dealt with at the time, everybody gets a good night's sleep once people have calmed down, and then it's dealt with the next day. Mm-hmm. And so it might be, kids there might be a special seat in the house, and they'll go there and have these conversations on that seat. They know that's the no trouble bubble. The parents not going to get a good night's sleep because they're going to be going, say a child saw pornography and says, I feel really bad. And, when the parent goes, so, that night they'll be Googling, what do I do if my kid sees pornography? But it just gives people that breathing space. Yes. And so that the child will know that they can tell them anything and that they will always be loved.
I think with my charges, I've always had you can say anything to me. You'll always be loved. It will never change. No matter what you say to me or what you've done, that will never change. And they knew they could just come and say whatever and know that although, eventually I might say to them, look, I didn't appreciate what you did, and these are the reasons why. At that moment in time when they were telling me, they wouldn't be getting an overreaction because I had promised them that whatever they told me wouldn't change our relationship.
Perfect. I'm disappointed in your behavior, yes, but I still love you. It's not the behavior. We're not condoning the behavior. Right. And there still needs to be, okay, this is going to be the consequence. Yeah. But I still love you. Kids need to hear that 1,000,000 times.
But I feel that there's a big disconnect, like you said, between people talking about emotions and the actual emotions that we all experience. For me, it's normal to explain to children that we all have emotions. We all get cross, we all get upset, we all are sad, we're all irritated, we're all annoyed, we're all frustrated. So if we all have these feelings, why can't we show children or tell children, I'm really upset today because, and obviously you give it to them in child chunks so they understand the reason why you're annoyed, but without knowing all the details. And then they can watch you work through your emotions so that then they can, do the same when they feel that same emotion as you. And I just don't understand why it's so hard for people to understand. I've worked for families where the parents didn't show any emotions to children because they don't need to know how I'm feeling. But actually they do, because when they have that same emotion as you, they won't know what to do with it. And then you'll have
that's what I said about the mirroring. If they don't see it, then they can't name it. One of the big things, there's a fantastic guy, Kabor Mate, talks about addiction and childhood trauma and all of this sort of stuff. His big thing is connections, sharing stories, especially about the olden days. Kids love hearing about the olden days, but yet parents don't, talk about that sort of stuff with their children when they need to have it modeled for them. And it's so important, but it's the behavior. It's okay. Don't get angry. Why not? It's okay to be angry. It's not okay to be hitting somebody when you're angry. Mm-hmm. It's the behavior that goes along with the emotion that causes the trouble. But all feelings are perfect. Yeah. And we need to really get that across to people that And like I said, keep modeling it all the time.
I found in the shade on the ground.